I swear by Almighty God that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Please have a seat, Mr. Winstanley. Yes, Mr. Moss.
Thanks, sir. Just start by giving us your full name, if you would.
Yes, good morning, sir. I'm Mark Winstanley. I'm an Assistant Chief Constable with Lancashire Police.
Thank you. And if we can have on screen Lanc 30292, please. This is, I think, your first and main statement to the inquiry, Assistant Chief Constable, and it's dated the 26th of August of this year. And can I just ask you to confirm that the contents of that statement are true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes, they are, sir.
Thank you. You have also provided for us, can we have on the screen, please, LCSP 504. This is a statement of which you are one of 3 co-authors, explaining the work of Lancashire Children's Safeguarding Assurance Partnership, in particular the rapid review that was done by that partnership after the attack. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
And can I just ask you to confirm that the content of that statement is true to the best of your knowledge and belief, insofar as it deals with Lancashire Constabulary?
Yes, it is.
Thank you. If we could have finally on screen, please, Lanc 30409. Lanc 30409. You have also provided, I'm sure with assistance from many others, a detailed chronology at the inquiry's request that goes through day by day, and in some cases hours by hour, hour by hour, the involvement of the constabulary in the events that we're examining. Is that right?
It is, sir, yes.
It's a helpful document. We thank you for it. Are the contents of that true to the best of your knowledge and belief, accepting that that will have been a corporately produced document?
Yes.
Thank you. We go back to your main statement, please, Lanc 30292. Mr. Winstanley, I should say for the record, and say that you are aware of the position, that your statement is commendably, if I may say so, full of detail. It runs to some 72 pages, and the exhibits and the references are much more extensive still. There is not time, nor is it appropriate for me to go through the totality of your statement. Can I just reassure you that your statement will be published and will stand as part of your evidence? If there are aspects of it that I don't cover that you wish to emphasise, I'll give you an opportunity at the end. But thank you for the detail that's covered in your statement.
Thank you.
So you tell us in this statement that you are the Assistant Chief Constable covering crime for Lancashire Constabulary, a post that I think you've held since March of last year.
That's right, yes.
Your role encompasses a responsibility for dealing with crime, for certain specialist capabilities, for investigations and protecting vulnerable people.
I do, yes.
Could you just give us a brief précis of your career, in particular your leadership positions in the last 12 years, just so that we have a feel for it? You deal with it in paragraph 5.
Yes, sure. So I've 29 years service with Lancashire Constabulary this month, the last 12 years of which have been in strategic leadership positions. So my career predominantly as a detective up until the rank of superintendent, and then I've fulfilled both uniform and detective senior leadership positions, both in charge of basic command units, so divisions, but also thematic lead for the head of the professional standards department as a detective superintendent. And I also fulfilled the role of head of investigations and safeguarding for the constabulary as a detective chief superintendent. And my final role prior to commencing this one was the divisional commander for East Lancashire.
Thank you. And within that impressive list of roles, picking up on your head of professional standards department role, would we be right in assuming that that role would have meant that you had to look at a large number of policing responses of all sorts and disciplinary matters and standards matters to see whether police response and behaviour in the broader sense was appropriate or inappropriate?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
And so when you have been able to review the interactions that the constabulary had with AR, would it be fair that you have considerable experience in that area?
Yes, it would.
You go on to set out some preliminary contextual comments about the task that you have been given. We have that starting on page 2 of your statement. First of all, you had no involvement yourself in responding to AR and his activities at all.
No, I didn't.
We should look, I think, at paragraph 11. It's perhaps an obvious point, but an important one. And you say this: I find it is quite difficult to analyse with hindsight what officers and staff could or should have done prospectively at the time. This is because the enormity of the horrific events of the 29th of July inevitably distorts even the greatest effort to avoid hindsight reasoning. Can I invite you, recognising the difficulty of the task, to attempt to do that, but your warning in relation to the difficulty of that task is set out very clearly on your statement?
Yes, of course, sir.
You say in paragraph 12 that you, in terms of your mindset, don't set about your evidence in writing, and I'm sure your evidence today, to seek to defend the actions of Lancashire Constabulary. You have wanted to take a learning approach, recognising that it's incumbent upon all public services to take all reasonable steps to try to prevent such an outcome from ever occurring again. Is that right?
It is, and I would like to point out at this point that within Lancashire Constabulary and policing in general, we are devastated that we weren't able to prevent these tragedies. And I see my role here as trying to assist the inquiry in looking at what learning can be taken out of it to prevent to try and do whatever we can to prevent something like this from happening again.
Thank you. You emphasise in paragraph 13, again perhaps flagging to the inquiry the difficulty of your task, but you have tried to be realistic. So in the assessment that you've made, you have to have an eye to what the resources in reality would be and the context of policing and other services at the time. Is that right?
It is, sir, yes.
So what we in the comfort of this room may think makes sense or would have been practicable or should have been done, wherever you think there are realities of resourcing or difficulties on the ground, you must, of course, flag them up as I go through your evidence. You make clear that in saying all of that, you are not suggesting that there are not areas for improvement for the future. Would you agree with this? It's going to be a theme that I'm going to pursue with you throughout the morning, that it is important to not just look at the individual responses to individual incidents that the constabulary was involved in, but to look at the cumulative picture of what was known or knowable, both by the police and by other agencies.
Yes, I think that's a very fair approach, sir.
Thank you. You have set out, turning to organisation and structures, you've set out a good deal of helpful detail in your statement. I'm not going to go through it all by any means, but sir, for your note in part, paragraphs 16 to 18, page 3, you deal with the chief officer roles and portfolios, of which yours, of course, is one. Paragraphs 19 to 21, you set out the BCUs. What's a BCU?
It's a basic command unit, so a division, essentially, an area of the force.
And you explained that there were 3 and that it was the South BCU that was involved in relation to AR, is that right?
Yes, so for context, South BCU covers Preston, West Lancashire, Chorley and South Ribble.
Thank you. You tell us that in terms of the senior rank within the BCU, that it, prior to the 1st of September 21, chief superintendents were not placed within the BCU, and the highest ranking officer was a superintendent, but then there were reintroduced chief superintendents after the 1st of September 2021. Very briefly, can you just tell us what that was all about and why they were reintroduced?
Yes, so we had a change of chief constable in April 2021, and when that chief constable came in, there was a review of the force leadership structure, and that led to the reintroduction of BCU commanders within each of the separate areas.
Thank you. And thinking about the levels of management, you explained that each BCU has a detective superintendent with responsibilities which cover crime and vulnerability. Is that right?
They do, yes.
So in general terms, in terms of the more senior management, is that where the overall responsibility for supervising the type of response to that was engaged with AR, that's where that would sit?
It would to some extent, sir, but also there are uniformed superintendents who have local policing and response chief inspectors who work to them. So they would have been engaged with some of the incidents that you've heard from our officers up to now.
And I wanted to come on to that because most of the response to AR involved, did it not, uniformed response officers?
That's correct, sir, yes.
Thank you. Where does the early action and community safety team sit within each BCU, or are they separately organised?
No, so the early action and community safety team at the time that was relevant to this sat under the local policing chief inspector, under the uniform superintendent. We've had a change in structure from June 23 onwards, and that the early action team now comes under the Safer Neighbourhoods team.
Right.
It essentially fulfills the same role.
But they do sit within the BCU structure.
That's correct, yes.
But there's been a change in relation to where they are within that structure.
No, they sit within the same structure under local policing. It's just a renaming of the role.
I follow, thank you. You've also set out from paragraph 23 onwards, page 5, the role of the force control room and their functions. And again, we may come to that with some of the individual incidents. Paragraph 33, page 9, you deal with the investigation management unit, as I think it was called at the time. And should we understand that that was responsible in some senses for quality assuring crime and non-crime investigations and for dealing with the requests for them to be closed?
Yes, that was their role, yes.
And so relevant to what we're looking at with AR, the investigation management unit should have been involved in those decisions and quality assurance in relation to the vulnerable child investigations, which we've seen at times were raised in relation to AR.
Yes, those investigations would be reviewed by the officers' sergeants and then reviewed prior to being closed down by the investigation management unit.
Thank you. And you've helpfully explained in terms of some of the language that at places can be confusing in relation to what's called PVP. Can we look at paragraph 41 at page 11, please? We've seen this in evidence during the inquiry, that officers quite frequently refer to the language of protecting vulnerable people and a protecting vulnerable people report. Taking it simply, I think that is was not at the time current language, and it should have been a reference by then to vulnerable child investigation.
Yes, there was a change in the name of the form from a protecting vulnerable persons form to a vulnerable child or a vulnerable adult investigation.
Thank you. And then in terms of some other teams, I can take it very, very briefly. The child protection team and the Public Protection Unit, two separate teams, didn't have a role with AR. I think in the case of the Child Protection Team, because that would have been domestic and sexual offences against children, which weren't involved here. And in relation to the Public Protection Unit, that provides strategic oversight rather than details with individual cases.
That's correct, yes.
And then finally on structures, paragraph 50, please, at page 12, the Violence Reduction Network. Assistant Chief Constable, I appreciate that that has undergone some name changes, but if we can keep to the Violence Reduction Network for today's purposes, was that, first of all, a process that was intended to be multi-agency in nature, bringing together police, health, education, local authorities and communities, as you set out in paragraph 50?
It was, yes.
And that was in place, I think, from 2019, with the intention of preventing and reducing serious violence across Lancashire by trying to tackle root causes.
That's correct, yes.
And presumably, young people thought to be at risk of being drawn into such violence, or who had committed such violence but might get deeper involved, would be the type of people to be referred to that network.
Yes, that's right, sir. And I think, as you can see from the statement, the age range for which people could be referred in changed in 2021.
So that's important for our purposes, that before 2021, the age range was 18 to 25, and thereafter it was 10 to 25. So it's only after April 2021 that AR would have fallen into the potentially appropriate age range.
That's right, yes.
Can I ask you this? Why was it set up with a minimum age of 18? To the outsider, if one's looking to reduce community violence, including knife crime, that might seem curious.
Yes, I'm afraid I don't know the answer to that, sir. I can try and find out for you and bring that back to the inquiry at a later date, if that would be helpful.
That would be helpful, thank you. So those were the structures. There's more detail set out in your statement, which we can refer to as we need to. Can we turn to policies and training, please? And again, I'm not going to go through the full detail of this because you've set out helpful detail extensively in your statement, but we need to pick up a few matters, please. Page 13 of your statement, paragraph 56. So far as the child protection policy is concerned, you've set out in your statement that the force has a responsibility to identify children who might be at risk, and that police officers are well placed to identify risks to children, yes?
Yes, that's correct.
And so the reference for that policy is Lanc 30168.
Thank you.
I think it's right, and it's not a criticism of you or that policy as such, but that policy, for understandable reasons perhaps, is focusing on the risk to children, not the risk that children may pose to others.
It does, yes.
Thank you. And then at paragraph 60, right at the bottom of the page, you refer to the child safeguarding help and guidance, which was in place from July 2020. So the reference for that is Lanc 30170.
Thank you.
Taking it shortly without perhaps turning it up, are you familiar with the fact that that does cover abuse and offending by children? So for your note, it's page 24.
Thank you.
But the focus there tends to be on sexual offending by children.
It does, yes.
And again, while you've helpfully set out the policies that were in place, I think it's right to say that you haven't been able to identify any policy which specifically relates to the risk of physical violence by children against others whether generally or as a result of a fixation on violence. Would that be fair?
It would be fair, sir, yes.
Can you help us with that? If you step back, is that a policy gap, or are the risks of that so wide and so varied that you can't really have a sensible policy, and there are dangers of having a policy for absolutely everything? I mean, just looking at that realistically, is that a problem that needs to be addressed, or do you think that it's understandable and acceptable?
I think we have processes in place to identify people who are at risk of reoffending or cause a risk to communities, whether they are adults or children. I don't believe necessarily that the absence of a policy prevents us from identifying those people or dealing with them. Perhaps getting ahead of my sequence of questioning a little, but if the processes for dealing with them include such things as the violence reduction network and community safety teams and early action, it's really important, is it not, that officers of whatever seniority, including probationary officers, are made aware of those channels and processes so that they can put them into effect if it's appropriate after an immediate incident that's been dealt with by response officers? Yes, yes.
And would you accept that, taken as a whole, while you say we don't need to have a policy specifically for this because we do have appropriate processes, that a weakness that is exposed by the type of review that you have done is shortcomings in the corporate knowledge of those type of referrals that could be made?
I think we do undertake training for our officers in relation to how to identify that risk and where they can then refer it on to. I think quite rightly what the work that we've done in preparation for and during the course of this inquiry has identified is that that knowledge isn't necessarily prevalent across all our officers.
Thank you. I think you identify as one of the improvements that's being considered is how training in the violence reduction network can be incorporated into initial officer training.
Yes, that's right.
But the logical implication from that is it wasn't in officer training at all originally.
It wasn't originally, sir, no.
Thank you. At paragraph 84, page 18 of your statement, please. You explain that there was training in police powers in respect of mental health and how mental health and policing interact, and that was part of the training that would be given to student officers, is that right?
It is, yes.
I think, though, that in terms of policies, there wasn't a policing and mental health operational guidance type of document in place for officers before April 2023 when it was first introduced.
I would need to double check that.
Can I ask this? Stepping away from individual policies and general training, would the training have equipped response officers in how to deal with children who have autism spectrum disorders?
I believe it would, yes. The training was focused on both the legislation, but then also there was, as you will see within there, how to communicate with individuals, how to recognise signs and symptoms, and then how they can then go on about making referrals to other agencies.
I don't mean by my next question to denigrate in any way the importance of that training, nor to suggest that it shouldn't be a priority. But is one of the issues that emerges out of events with AR that it is important for officer training to cover the fact that for some individuals, a mental health diagnosis may be relevant to increased risk of them offending against others?
Yes, I think that's a fair point.
And also that it is important that officers are trained in the fact, see an August 2025 letter over which I think you'll be aware, that they are not qualified to judge capacity in terms of whether a child has capacity for their decisions and is responsible for violent actions. And so they shouldn't just assume that a child who is committing an act of violence or threatening to do one and who has a mental health diagnosis is not responsible and doesn't have capacity.
No, that's very true. And I think particularly in AR's case and relevant to many cases that our officers deal with, there is a significant difference between somebody who is suffering from a mental health disorder and is suffering from autism. You know, and our officers now are very frequently dealing with young people who suffer with autism or other neurodiverse conditions. And I've seen many occasions where somebody suffering from autism is by no way a bar to them being prosecuted for their offending behaviour. But I do think that that's something that we could perhaps strengthen within our training for our officers.
Because the risk is that if that is not done and is not understood, that criminal acts against others perpetrated by children may be dealt with far too leniently as a result of a misunderstanding and putting children into either mental health or criminal activity boxes.
It could be a risk, and there is no reason why both of those matters couldn't be engaged during the course of an investigation.
Thank you. So far as the Multi-Agency Safeguarding Hub is concerned, MASH, could we just have on screen, please, Lanc 30395? This is the statement of Detector Inspector Melissa Kelly of the Constabulary. And it's right, isn't it, that this statement, which is itself helpfully detailed, has been provided by Lancashire Constabulary to explain the detail of the force's involvement with the MASH.
That's right, sir.
And perfectly reasonably, and a number of times within your own witness statement to the inquiry, you say further details in relation to the MASH are set out in D.I. Kelly's statement, yes?
Yes, that's right.
And again, by bringing it up on screen and introducing it in this way, can I give you the reassurance that that statement will be published, excuse me, so that the full detail of that will be available. If at any time this gets beyond your own knowledge and experience, please just say so. But by way of brief overview, she explains that It's staffed by a mixture of Lancashire Constabulary staff and staff from other agencies, the MASH.
That's right.
And its role is to receive referrals from various sources, to assess them, and then ensure that relevant agencies are made aware.
It is, and I think it's important, and if it assists the inquiry, just to be clear, the MASH is not an operational department or an operational arm of policing. It is there to receive information, risk assess it, and then make sure it's shared with the appropriate agencies.
Thank you. And so, reflecting that, I think it operates pursuant to a memorandum of understanding between the various agencies.
That's right, yes.
But it's part of the way in which the information sharing requirements of the policy working together to safeguard children are met in Lancashire.
That's right.
If we can go, please, to page 11 of D.I. Kelly's statement and look at paragraph 49. She sets out the key objectives of the MASH. So a coordinated agency approach which allows early identification of threat, risk and harm, and a focus on early intervention, preventative action, keeping the child adult at the centre. Safeguarding activity which is timely, proportionate and necessary for keeping children and their families safe. A service which ensures vulnerable children, young people and adults receive the services and help they need at the right time, in the right place and from the right person. There's a point about business intelligence which helps services work together to improve consistency, address gaps and duplication in service provision, and to improve outcomes for those in need of services. And then circumstances which are assessed at levels 3 and 4 of Lancashire's continuum of need and levels 1 and 2 of Lancashire's guidance for safeguarding concerns. So those are the key objectives. In terms of the mechanics, a safeguarding referral is submitted by a police officer to the MASH, and we've seen that that, in some cases, is done automatically.
It is, yes.
But could also be done deliberately, but not automatically. I think I should make this referral to the MASH and it could be sent in as a referral.
That's correct, and that's when you've heard officers referring to vulnerable child investigations. That's them referring something into the MASH.
And just in outline, what then happens to it?
So the referral will be made. It'll be received by the police element of the MASH. They will review the details of the referral. They will also review police systems and other agency systems that they have access to identify any additional information that may be relevant. The safeguarding support officer will then conduct a secondary risk assessment to establish whether they agree or disagree with the level of risk that the officer has identified when they've submitted it. And they will then make a decision on whether to share it with other agencies, and if so, which agencies to share it with.
Who employs the safeguarding support officer?
So the safeguarding support officers are employed by the Constabulary.
Thank you.
By Lancashire Police.
Thanks.
Can we just go ahead, please, to paragraph 207 in D.I. Kelly's statement? I'll just give you the page number in a moment, but it's page 207, paragraph 207, forgive me. Page 48. Thank you, Mr. Goss. 48. She says, as previously mentioned, to summarise, Lancashire Constabulary MASH, and she's talking there about the Lancashire Constabulary team within MASH, are an information sharing service who do not receive any feedback responses from partner agencies following the sharing of information. Therefore, the police do not know what, if any, steps are taken as a result of the information being shared. Does it follow from that all the frontline officers, or indeed Lancashire Constabulary generally, are aware of, will be a record of who the information has been shared with, but not what's been done as a result?
I'll cover that in two parts, if I may, sir. So, first and foremost, if there may be a requirement for a strategy meeting following the information being submitted, in which case the relevant operational police department would be aware. So I apologise, that's perhaps not particularly clear in my statement. So, for example, if it's a child protection concern, that a child is at risk from sexual abuse or neglect, the local child protection team would be involved. If it was a risk of antisocial behaviour, for example, the local policing team would be involved, and exploitation, the child sexual exploitation team. So if that generates a meeting in relation to one of those areas of work, then police would be engaged at that point. I think one thing that I've thought carefully of when considering the different referrals that have gone in relation to the inquiry in AR, there does appear to be a gap there between the feedback coming back in for us to then understand if there is a further role for the police.
Because subject to correction by any of my learned friends, in AR's case, there were multi-agency meetings that took place in December 2019 and I think on the 5th of January 2020. But thereafter, are you aware of any strategy meetings raised by the MASH or by a MASH referral that involved Lancashire Police happening at all?
So again, I perhaps cover that in 2 points. The responsibility for convening the strategy meetings sits with the local authority, not the MASH, just to be clear. But no, I'm not aware of any further strategy meetings taking place in relation to AR that the police were involved with.
Does that cause you, in the review that you have done, to be worried about the efficiency and effectiveness of the MASH as a mechanism for proper multi-agency intervention?
Sir, no, it doesn't. The efficiency and effectiveness of the MASH, for me, isn't the issue that I've identified through here. It is once that has then gone from the MASH and there is an operational response, it's how the different agencies have then worked together to make sure that each agency is aware of who is doing what and who's responsible for what. So I don't see that responsibility sitting with the MASH, sir.
I understand your answer, but the MASH is the mechanism by which and through which that is meant to happen. Actions are then meant to follow thereafter. The fact that there was no multi-agency meeting after January 2020 speaks volumes, does it not, as to, in overview, a failure of proper multi-agency working in relation to the risks from AR?
I think it has highlighted some issues in relation to the different agencies working together to understand their roles and responsibilities in managing AR.
Including Lancashire Constabulary?
Yes, sir.
Because that system in which you say you've identified the lack of feedback, and it's referred to by D.A. Kelly in her helpful statement, if we go back to her paragraph 49, please, at page 11, a system in which, absent the authority calling for a multi-agency meeting, there is no feedback process for what other agencies have done going back to the police. That's hardly likely to assist in what's referred to in the first bullet point as the early identification of threat, risk and harm, and a focus on early intervention if you're not getting feedback as to what's being done?
So I understand your point completely. I suppose my position around it is that that doesn't sit with the MASH. Once they've shared that information and the agencies are involved, and I don't seek to absolve Lancashire Constabulary's responsibility from this in any way, shape or form, it is then the responsibilities of those agencies to work together to identify that risk and to deal with it. It's not, I don't see that as a failure of the MASH, sir.
But forgive me, I'm not focusing so much on the MASH. If you take it as read that the MASH in a sense is a conduit through to other agencies, but that whole process in which the MASH is acting as a conduit, if no feedback is received by the constabulary, it's hardly likely to be an effective way of multi-agency working that helps for the early identification of threat, risk and harm and a focus on early intervention, if, putting it bluntly, the police aren't told what other agencies are going to be doing as a result of information that you have shared.
I wouldn't disagree with you. Again, I think that is a reflection of how the agencies have worked together afterwards, after the information has been shared.
And again, in terms of the objective of service, which ensures vulnerable children, young people and adults receive the services and help they need at the right time, if D.I. Kelly's evidence, as she candidly sets out in her statement, is that you don't, as a matter of course, receive feedback as to what the agencies have then done with the information that's shared, that doesn't seem well designed for effective ways of ensuring that the right services are being provided across all the agencies.
Again, I understand the point. However, what I would say in relation to AR is that once that information was shared, that did generate interventions from early help, from CAMS, who arguably were the right agencies to put that support and intervention in with him at that time, notwithstanding the issues around feedback.
That may be the case, but when the response officers on the ground, for example, or the force control room was having to deal with a call from AR's home, if you've had no feedback through the multi-agency setup about the difficulties that CAMS have had, if you've had no feedback from schools about the difficulty that they've had, the extent of the non-attendance, that should all be informing how police officers, in the exercise of their discretion, exercise their powers.
Yes, apologies. I may have misunderstood the point or the question, but no, that's right. I agree.
And can I suggest that that is not the other agencies? That is the whole system, including the constabulary.
Yes, I accept that, yes.
Because we haven't seen, and it's not a criticism of you personally, as I'm sure you'll understand, Assistant Chief Constable, but we've not seen any evidence from the constabulary at a corporate level saying this system is problematic because we're not getting information back. It just seems to be how the system works.
Yes, I think we're reliant on the multi-agency working taking place afterwards. So it's a fair point.
Thank you. The approach in your statement, you set out for the force control room and in terms of multi-agency working, the relations you had with other agencies. And I'm not going to go through that detail. I want to turn to your helpful assessment of each of the main interactions with AR. So can we start with the dealings with AR from the 7th of October to the 10th of December 2019? Now, in relation to that, we've heard, as I'm sure you know, from Constable McNamee and Sergeant Bramall directly on it. And I'm not going to go through the full factual narrative, but for your note, paragraph 132 through to 166 is where Mr. Winstanley deals with it in his statement. Can I focus on your assessment of what was done well and what was done less well in relation to this event. It's important I don't overlook the former. So in relation to that, I think the report from the NCA that came in was processed and allocated out to response officers to deal with promptly against the background that there was possibly a threat to life. Would you agree?
That's right, yes.
And I think you've dealt in your statement with the fact that it led to the submission of a high-risk vulnerable child referral, which was assessed by the MASH and shared with other agencies, and that was all as it should be.
Yes, correct.
And then significant efforts were made to ensure that the school were aware of the risk by the following morning. So there was an op in Compass referral, but in addition, the officers ensured that a web form was filled out on the internet so that the school were aware, because it was out of school hours. And there was a request that the early turn sergeant contact the school directly. And I think in relation to all of that, putting it shortly, that would reflect, would you say, good practice?
It would, yes.
So far as the detail in relation to op in Compass is concerned, there's also a Lancashire Constabulary statement from DI Marston that gives helpful detail in relation to that, which I'm not proposing to cover with this witness, but for your note, Lanc 30407.
Thank you very much.
And that good practice, I think, meant that when AR went to school the next day, he was searched. He didn't, in fact, had a knife on him on that occasion, and that in due course led to him being permanently excluded. But in terms of dealing with the immediate risk, would you agree that that was all both as it should be and reflects quite good practice?
Yes, it was.
Could we just look, please, at paragraph 149 of your statement? It's at page 34. So if we could have 149 and 150 expanded, please. You say here that the position of the constabulary is that the response to the call from the NCA has been a high-risk vulnerable child investigation, and the decision not to pursue a criminal investigation against AR was appropriate. And you go on in 150 to say that arrest would have been an alternative option, but when considering various factors, you consider that the non-criminal route, the non-arrest route, was appropriate. Could you just help to explain that in your own words, why you think that that was right?
Yes, of course. So I think first and foremost, this was the first time that AR had come to police attention. He was 13 years old at the time. Clearly the report was of some significant concern. There was additional information there in relation to his potential autism. And I was satisfied that the immediate safeguarding that needed to take place had been done and had been done well, and that the school were then made aware in order that the appropriate referrals could be made to establish what was actually leading to this behaviour. There were, as I say, alternative options available to the officer, including arresting him, and he could have invited him in for a voluntary interview potentially. However, in the circumstances I've described, I think the decision to put the referral in and to look at support available was appropriate at that time.
Thank you. Those factors, on any view, carried and should have carried weight. On the other side of the scales, as Constable McNamee told this inquiry, it was a consideration that this was a child with both an apparent intent to cause really serious harm, who had also equipped himself with the means to do it, and had been carrying a knife on his own admission some 10 times to school. Ultimately, what arose out of this was a safeguarding referral. Was that a sufficient response?
I believe it was in the circumstances at the time, and I suppose you need to, I need to consider what the benefits of taking him into custody at that time would be. They were dealing with it in the evening. There was no risk to anybody at that immediate time, and the referral to services would allow them to establish what it was, or to try and investigate what it was that was leading him to behave in this way. So, having taken all that into account, I do think that it was the appropriate response at the time.
If the violence reduction network had been in place at that time for those 10 years of age and upwards, which we know it wasn't, would AR have been suitable for referral based on this event?
There would have been the option to refer him in. With regards to the divert programme, I think it's covered within the statement that that's reliant on the consent of that individual to be referred into there as well.
Yes. And the answer to my question?
Sorry, could you remind me? Sorry, I thought I covered
If the
that.
violence reduction network had been in place at the time for those 10 years of age and upwards, would AR have been suitable for referral?
He could have been referred, yes.
Would he have been suitable for referral? Carrying a
Yes,
knife,
he was. He made reference to carrying a knife, so yes, he would have been suitable.
not just made reference to carrying knives, but carrying knives into school on his own admission on 10 occasions.
Yes.
With the stated intent, which he doesn't seem to have recanted, at least initially, to cause very serious harm to somebody he thought had been bullying him. Would that be a suitable referral? Not
It
just
would.
could have.
Sorry, yes, it would.
Thank you. You set out in your statement, can I deal with it relatively briefly, some things that were not done so well in this. You've identified 3 points. Paragraph 152 on page 35, please. The first of them, I think, is that there was an additional information that had been provided by David Cregan from the Range School on the 8th of October. And just to remind ourselves, for your note, paragraph 142 of this statement, that was information that AR had said that he would use it to stab someone, the knife, and had also made reference the week prior to teachers getting murdered in the context of having been given detention and then saying teachers getting murdered. And is it right that what you're telling us in paragraph 152 is that that information should have been reshared with the MASH and could potentially have led to the matter being treated more seriously by the other agencies if it had been included in the information?
Yes, excuse me. Yes, that's right. The officer updated the vulnerable child investigation, but should have reshared it with the MASH so it could then be reconsidered for sharing with other agencies.
In fact, it's right that we should record that Mr. Cregan spoke directly to the local authority after speaking to Constable McNamee. So it may be that that made no difference, but the police should have seen to the sharing of that information.
Yes, it would have been good practice.
Thank you. And at paragraph 153, the fact that the incident was never transferred to Merseyside Police for them to record in crime and consider whether criminal investigation was appropriate, you recognise was a shortcoming, is that right?
It is, yes.
As you say, PC McNamee accepts himself that he could and should have done that. Can I suggest that it goes a little bit further than what you've accepted in your statement? Because you'll be aware, Assistant Chief Constable, that initially there was a refusal to close the report by Lancashire because the sharing with Merseyside Police had not been done. Do you remember that from the detail?
Yes, it was the sergeant who
Yeah.
refused to close it, yes.
And yet 2 weeks later, when it still hadn't been done, the investigation report was then closed.
Yes, that would appear to be an error, sir.
Yeah. And so we shouldn't focus here solely on PC McNamee, because that was a failure, would this be right, of the IMU?
Yes, it was a failure of the system to ensure that that action took place, to make sure that Merseyside had that information on their systems.
Yeah. Failure of the system. It was a failure of the IMU, who are meant to quality assure.
Yes, that was one of the issues within there, yes.
And should that have featured, do you think, in the additional points of learning?
On reflection, possibly yes. I think to qualify, at that time we had a relatively new computer system in Connect that had been implemented shortly before. That system is far improved now. The timeliness of reviewing those referrals and the quality assurance process is far improved now than it was at the time of this referral.
While one understands that, we're all familiar with IT frustration systems that are slow. If a management unit has declined to close a report on day one because an action hasn't been taken, there's no excuse for it being closed or approved to be closed by that same unit 2 weeks later when the action still hasn't been taken.
No, sir. My understanding is that the initial refusal to close was from the officer's sergeant, not the investigation management unit. And then the subsequent decision to close was taken by the investigation management unit without that action having been completed.
They should have checked that
Yes.
that had happened,
Yes.
regardless of computer difficulties.
Yes.
That's fairly basic.
Yes.
Thank you. And then thirdly, your paragraph 154, again, you've fairly set out that there was a shortcoming here in the sense that no specific action was taken in relation to AR's intended victim in terms of liaising with that victim's family to ensure that they were put in the picture.
Yes, I couldn't see any information on the paperwork or the details that were available to say whether that had taken place or not.
Would it be unfair to suggest that that, in a sense, is symptomatic of the focus being on AR's needs and his safeguarding and actions taken in relation to him, and not enough focus on the risks that he posed to others, do you think?
I'm not sure about that, sir, because I don't know what conversations subsequently took place between the officer and the school, and whether the school had arranged to undertake that action. So I understand the position, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it was symptomatic of an entire focus on him.
Because this was, at least with hindsight, a significant event, carrying knives into school, with the Chair's permission, I just want to spend a little bit longer on some further aspects in relation to this. The first is this. AR had told officers that he was pretty certain to use the knife against his target. So for your note, the entry in relation to that is Lank 4041, page 6, the entry for 22:15 that night.
Thank you.
So pretty certain to use the knife against his target. That is significant information.
Yes, yes.
When it comes to the referrals that were made, that information doesn't appear in those terms. So what comes out in the referrals, I'm not intending to take you to them because I'll be corrected if I summarize it unfairly, but in essence what appeared in the referrals is AR having a knife in self-defense, and that he believed that if things escalated, then he may use it. That the reference for that is Lanx 4066 at page 1. If that is right, do you think that there was a further problem here, that the risk level of harm to others ended up being somewhat diluted?
If that's right, as you suggest, sir, I would expect the officers to record the exact details or the accurate details of what AR had told them, and for that to be shared on the referrals. So if that information wasn't on the referrals in that form, then it should have been.
Thank you. Secondly, this, as we explored with him, there was no update on the log when AR's father, Alfonso, contacted PC McNamee to ask him to speak on AR's behalf at the meeting with the school. And PC McNamee's evidence was that, combined with the further information from Mr. Cregan on the 8th of October, he considered that AR was showing worryingly little remorse or understanding. There didn't appear to be appropriate challenge from his parents, and that increased the risk. And would you agree that that assessment made by PC McNamee is something that should have been recorded for the benefit of officers who might later be dealing with AR?
Yes, it would have helped them for any subsequent dealings, yes.
Because, again, putting it in blunt, but I hope not crude terms, it's one thing if a 13-year-old has fallen into bad misconduct and indeed criminality in taking a knife into school, but his parents are determined to deal with it. It puts a different reflection on it if father is saying to the police, come and advocate for my son, because this has all been taken out of context. That's a worrying sign.
I would agree. I suppose what I would say in relation to that from the officer's point of view is that they've ensured that the relevant referrals have been made, that those services are aware of that information. It was covered by Mr. Cregan, I understand, in his information as well. So at this early stage, and bearing in mind this is the first engagement that police have had with AR, I think it would be reasonable for the officer to expect that that information was covered in any meetings with CAMS, social care, etc., who were engaging with him.
But, Assistant Chief Constable, the difficulty, I suggest, with your response is this, that going back to we referred this information on, we passed this information on, is, I suggest, at best only half the answer. Because if that information is passed on to other agencies, but the system is such that you don't get feedback on what the other agencies do, you're not going to get feedback that is recorded on the systems, on police systems.
No.
Would you agree?
Yes, yes.
And if there's no recording of the result of the referral to other agencies, it puts a particular focus on the need to ensure that police systems have the right information on.
Yes, no, I accept that.
So it's not a complete answer to say, well, this information was shared on. I was asking you about a potential failure here in terms of recording it on police systems.
Yes, and I think that's a fair point. I would expect all the relevant information to be recorded on that system, yes.
Again, putting it very bluntly, for PC Fairclough, and you know of whom I speak, the response officer for March 22, would have been very helpful for him to have a warning, be cautious here, because there are signs that the parents do not necessarily take the right approach in terms of the severity of their son's behaviour.
Yes, that information would have helped, I'm sure.
In that context, PC McNamee told us that there were issues with the Connect system which hindered his ability. I think you've touched on that. Is that now much improved in terms of accessibility to Connect and speed of response?
Yes, it is. It is.
Thirdly, PC McNamee also accepted that he could have considered a referral to Lancashire Constabulary's community safety team and probably would have done one now facing the same situation again. In the absence of the violence reduction network being available because of age, a referral to the community safety team would also have been appropriate. Would you agree?
Yes, it would.
And that may have been a way for the police, perhaps in consultation with other agencies, but certainly for the police to be involved in an intervention directly with AR about the dangers of carrying knives.
Yes, it would.
And the fourth, I've touched on already, the violence reduction network. I think you'll promise to come back to us about why the original age was 18, but that there was a gap at the time. He would have been a suitable referral, but the system at the time didn't allow for that.
Yes, that's right.
And so does it come to this, that you would also accept those further 4 areas of learning in addition to the 3 helpfully set out in your statement?
Yes, I think that's fair.
Is there a risk, do you think, that this early and potentially important event is an early example of ultimately a safeguarding referral being sent off, but that being treated by the constabulary as all that needed to be done to manage the risk?
Yes. However, I do think what it has also done is ensured that services who were better equipped than police to understand AR's behaviour were engaged at the earliest possible opportunity as well.
Thank you. I'll turn to December 2019 and the further information received. And you deal with this starting at the bottom of page 35 of your statement, but the meat of it comes in paragraph 156 and onwards. Could we have it, please? Page 36 of Lanc 30292, page 36. In relation to this, so this is the further information that was passed on by Acorn's school. First of all, it's right to recognise, perhaps I should just recap what the information was. So searching on the internet for school shootings, walking up and down, punching his hand, business, when talking about business ideas, starting a new business in the area would not be a good idea. People would think you would kill them and that people do not trust others in case they get murdered. And then during a lesson, it's right that we should give the context. It is in the context of painting Call of Duty images. But AR said, why can we have these pictures with guns but can't look at guns on the internet? And then he asked for a picture of a severed head. So that was the further information. And it's right to recognise that I think both Constables McNamee and Harrison did respond to that in terms of giving the school advice. Would you agree?
Yes.
And that was appropriate? And that was appropriate for them to give advice?
It was, yes.
At 161, please, which is just over the page. you mention, just over the page, please, at page 37, you mentioned there PC Harrison giving an indication of declining to attend a multi-agency meeting on the 5th of December on the basis that AR was, on the face of it, a higher risk than community safety can deal with. Was that right?
I think, bearing in mind the additional information that had been provided by the school, the understanding that there was a meeting to take place, I can understand how PC Harrison, I'm not sure who told PC Harrison that, I would need reminding of that, sir, but I can understand why the early action or community safety team would think that that was of a higher risk, particularly in light of the further referral to prevent.
Yeah, it was Sergeant Bramall.
Sergeant Bramall, thank you.
And Sergeant Bramall has told us that the background to this was that this was seen as a case for prevent by them at that time. Is that right, though, that if a case is being, especially if it's in its early stages of consideration by prevent, that would mean that there's no role for the community safety team?
No, it's not right in itself, sir. No, I think until decisions have been made as to whether that individual will be taken into prevent or not, there is still potentially a role for the community safety team at that point.
Yeah. In particular, would you agree, because it was the very early stages, and it was possible, putting it in simplistic terms, that AR may not be taken on by prevent?
Yes.
And if that was the case, as indeed it ended up being the case, it would be important to have a team within the constabulary who were continuing to have an involvement. Would you agree?
I would, yes.
And would the community safety team have been the most appropriate team as things were organised at that time?
At that stage, I think they would. The community safety team was intended to put interventions in with children, vulnerable people who were on the cusp of criminality potentially, to try and divert them away from that. So it would have been an appropriate team to be involved, yes.
Thank you. We know that PC Harrison was aware that a prevent referral had been made, and in paragraph 164 of your statement, I think you say, in relation to the actions of surnames for speed, McNamee and Harrison, they both acted appropriately in the circumstances. McNamee and Harrison offered advice to the school, asserted that they should make the referral to the MASH themselves, asking the school to make the referral themselves as opposed to McNamee and Harrison completing that is appropriate, as it allows the agency with full and first-hand information to make the referral. Does that remain your view?
Yes, it does make sense, yeah.
It's right to say, though, isn't it, that you recognise that while those steps, as you see it, was appropriate, there should have been a creation of report on Lancashire systems, both about the information received, but also about the fact of the prevent referral.
Yes, it didn't appear that there was a record made of those events on Lancashire systems, and that would have helped officers dealing with AR in the future had they been able to have access to it.
Thank you. So in 166, you say, while it's appropriate for the school to make the referral to the MASH themselves, the officers should have recorded the additional information, including that relevant to the risk posed by AR, on Lancashire systems. And you say as an intelligence entry, it would also have been perfectly appropriate, wouldn't it, to go back to the vulnerable child incident that was still open back from October, and to provide that further information on that?
Yes, either of those two options would have been suitable, yes.
Thank you. And while you have helpfully set that out in clear terms, 166 as a point of learning, If we look at the potential impact of that on later events, it wasn't recorded on the vulnerable child log, would you agree?
Yes.
Nor was the underlying information that had led to the referral detailed on that log in a visible way. So the additional information that had come in wasn't recorded clearly on Lancashire systems.
I don't believe so, no.
And PC Harrison himself doesn't appear to have been aware of the earlier log.
No.
And as a result of that, would it be fair to say that different officers who are engaging with AR have different levels of information available to them?
Yes, that's correct.
But those, such as PC Harrison, who obviously in a number of other respects did many things that were proactive and appropriate, but as a result of that, PC Harrison had important knowledge that wasn't recorded on the systems and wouldn't have been readily available to later response officers.
Yes, that's my understanding, yes.
And here again, we see, do we not, the limitation of all of the information was passed on to other agencies. Because in later events, you, the constabulary, had I'm going to suggest, critical need to have that information available when there were later events.
So I think it's fair to say, and I accept that information could and should have been recorded on Lancashire systems that wasn't, that would have given us a better informed position for officers dealing with AR later on, yes.
And in particular, when we come to it in the March incident, that information that has come and led to the referral at this stage about showing an interest in a severed head, about looking up school shootings. Nothing could have been so likely as to change the approach of the response officers in the March incident to knowing that AR had that kind of a background.
It would have been very helpful for them to have that information to assist the decision making, I agree, yes.
Well, forgive me, but it's not just very helpful, is it? It was critical that they had that information, not just helpful. That was the information that was going to lead them to make the right decisions in dealing with AR's risk.
I entirely agree that that information would have been important to help them with the decision making, yes.
Thank you. Dealing with AR from the 11th of December 2019 to February 2020, the attack by AR on the 11th of December on another pupil with a hockey stick. Can we just have your paragraph 169, please? You set out there that because that happened at the Range School, it was for Merseyside Police to investigate that as a crime. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Lancashire Force Control Room had received a call from Acorn School. They were in the process of transferring that to Merseyside Police when it was confirmed that AR had already been found and arrested by Merseyside police officers.
Yes.
So at that immediate level, that was all appropriate.
Yes, that's right.
PC Harrison, then, you deal with it in your paragraphs 170 to 173. And in particular, I don't wish to be unfair to PC Harrison because having raised issues that he didn't do, you've set out in 170 to 173 the way in which PC Harrison acted as something of a conduit for information between Merseyside Police, Counter-Terrorism Police North West, who by now received the Prevent referral, and the council, as well as the community safety team. So PC Harrison was involved in all of that appropriate activity.
He was, yes.
But the difficulty again comes with that while information was being passed on, it wasn't recorded sufficiently on Lancashire Force systems.
No.
because it was a Merseyside crime. Would you agree?
At that time, yes.
And that, if we look at 174, that's not a point purely about PC Harrison, because a safeguarding referral has been sent into the Lancashire Force control room. Yes?
Yes.
And that doesn't seem to have led to those matters being properly recorded on the Lancashire systems either.
No, it would appear that that was forwarded onto the MASH for recording within those systems, but it doesn't appear that that's been recorded on Lancashire systems, no.
And that is a concerning pattern, I suggest, that is emerging as we go through stage by stage. Referred to another agency, not fully recorded on your systems.
Yes, I would agree with that.
And all of that, while one of course understands the policing reasons for why Merseyside police were dealing with that, because he's gone to his old school in their area, this is a child who's living in Lancashire, in that constabulary's area, yes?
Yes.
And attending school by that stage in a Lancashire school.
That's right, yes.
In due course, Harrison and Bramall attend the multi-agency strategy meeting on the 17th of December 2019. You've drawn attention, can we look at it, paragraph 178, to the email received from PC Thompson from Counter-Terrorism Police North West, confirming that she would be attending the strategy meeting and that AR, quotes, will be coming to prevent. Do you see that there?
I do, yes.
From the minutes of the meeting, though, and from the evidence of Sergeant Bramall, would you agree that they didn't make much contribution to the meeting themselves?
Yes, I think that's clear from the minutes, and I think the officers accept that themselves.
Yeah. They were taking the view that AR was now Prevent's responsibility so far as policing was concerned.
That would appear to be their understanding at the time, yes, sir.
But if one looks at what was actually being said at the meeting, could we have Lanc 504 at page 6, please? This is the minutes of that meeting on the 17th. It's right at the bottom of the page, I think. Last two paragraphs. So, Constable Thompson from Prevent identified that she will be completing an assessment regarding AR and considering if a referral to channel programme would be appropriate for him. So at the meeting, it was being made explicitly clear that AR was being considered for referral rather than that he was coming to Prevent. Would you agree?
I think out of fairness to PC Harrison and Sergeant Bramall, there is conflicting information there. The initial information was that he will be coming to Prevent. And then in the strategy meeting, I agree that there appears to be a slightly different position.
If we look at the outcomes of the meeting, it's over the page, please. If we look at agreed actions, and the second bullet point, Prevent team to commence initial assessment. While one understands why you draw attention to the email, the formal meeting is the place where to understand and clarify who's doing what. Would you agree?
Yes.
And on the face of the minutes of the meeting, it's right, isn't it, that Prevent were making clear that they were at an initial assessment stage, not that they were taking on responsibility.
That's right, and I would have expected in those circumstances conversations to take place between the Prevent team and the community safety team so that everybody was aware of what was the next course of action, whether they would take him on or not.
And just to perhaps complete this area of questioning before we take our morning break, we know that those officers were not specifically invited to the next strategy meeting as there are no actions for them, but it would have been better practice for them to attend, wouldn't it? Because, not least because if AR was not going to be taken on by Prevent, the community safety team would be the team, if any, that would have an ongoing responsibility.
Yes, at that time they would have been the most appropriate team if Prevent weren't taking him on.
And if they had attended that meeting and been more proactive in that way, they would have learnt in clear terms at the next meeting that AR had not been adopted by the Prevent programme.
Yes, they would have known at that point.
There is some sections in your statement where you raise for consideration the need for improvement in information sharing from Prevent / counter-terrorism policing to you as an individual constabulary. But if Lancashire Constabulary's community safety team had remained actively involved in these meetings, they would have understood that information.
They would have done, yes.
And the lack of effective recording of information, would you agree, means that the fact of a Prevent referral, which was known to Lancashire officers at this time, became lost to officers dealing with AR later on.
Yes.
I've been asked to explore with you, as I've done with other witnesses, Lanc 4064. This is an intelligence report for the December 2019. It's submitted on the 13th, but the event is the 11th. That's what you get from the small print on the top left. Sarah, could we just have the main text highlighted in the information text state? That's got information, including important information potentially about searching for school shootings in America. But the reference to Prevent in this Lancashire Constabulary intelligence report comes on page 2. It's in the log entries bottom right. So log of inquiries, submission text, a Prevent referral has been received in CTB in relation to school shootings in America. Would that second page have been available to frontline officers?
I don't believe it would, no.
Without going into unnecessary detail, would that be information that would be known to those working on the intelligence who may have appropriate clearances?
Yes, my understanding of that is that's a record of what has been done in relation to processing that intelligence as opposed to information that was available to frontline officers.
Thank you. Merseyside Police take forward the criminal investigation. It leads to a conviction. Do Lancashire Constabulary, we'll hear about youth offending and others in due course, but do Lancashire Constabulary, as the local force for where he lives, have any specific role in dealing with AR while he's on the referral order?
No, they don't.
So I'm going to turn to a different topic. Would that be an appropriate moment?
It certainly would, Mr. Moss. I'll sit again at 10 to. Mr. Moss.
Thank you, sir. Assistant Chief Constable, in the chronology, we've reached the two incidents in November. Can I deal first with the 5th of November incident? That's a call received from AR's parents at around 2:30 in the afternoon on that day, page 42 of your statement. I think this was one of several occasions, first of all, where the call coming into the police went to Merseyside police, I think because of the proximity of the border. Have I understood that correctly?
That's correct, and my understanding is it would depend where the phone mast is that it would then divert the call towards.
Thank you. Not I'm going to suggest of causative significance in our case, but given that it happened a number of times, is there anything being done about that calls get routed to the wrong phone? Is there a case for joint force control rooms with neighbouring forces?
I think that the control rooms work closely together to make sure that if that happens, there is the ability to transfer it quickly. But ultimately, this is very much dependent on the location of the phone masts.
That's not something of substantive concern to you?
No, it's not, because there is the ability to transfer it very quickly, and it's certainly not something that I consider has had any material impact on how we've dealt with the incidents involving AR.
Okay. On this occasion, the information received is that AR has been smashing the house up and throwing things around. During the call, they say they've changed their minds and asked the police not to attend. It was said that this behaviour was prompted by an unexpected arrival of a stranger who'd knocked at the door. And you set out the chronology looking at your 193 at 8 minutes past 5, so 2.5 hours after the initial call. There was a call back to AR's mother. She confirmed that she didn't want police to attend. And then the substantive dealing with it is PC Williams at 6 o'clock, 3.5 hours after the original call, dealing with it by telephone. Briefly, please, the grading of this call, initially I think it was grade 4 and subsequently it was grade 3. Was that an appropriate grading?
Yes, I think so at the time with the circumstances presented.
Was the decision to deal with that incident by telephone and not visit, based on the information that the officers had at the time, a reasonable one?
Yes, I think based on the information that was provided back to PC Williams when he made contact with AR's mother and the information that she provided to him, particularly about how it may upset him further, and the fact that they were engaged with other services and that he calmed down, I think that was a reasonable decision at the time.
Thank you. Again, I'm seeking, albeit at speed, to avoid unfairness to the officers concerned. So PC Williams submitted a medium-risk safeguarding referral and a vulnerable child investigation that went to the MASH, that was shared with other agencies, also submitted an Encompass referral for AR's school. That was marked as out of area, which may have delayed the Acorns receiving it. I think you'd agree?
Yes, it would.
But given that AR wasn't actually attending school at that point, it may be that that would make no difference. So action was taken by PC Williams.
Yes.
An appropriate action.
Yes, appropriate action, and the fact that he'd recorded a vulnerable child investigation would have been on the system and available to officers dealing with any future incidents as well.
But briefly, two factors. The first is, so far as Lancashire Constabulary are concerned, nothing then happens. That there is no team engaged because the community safety team aren't engaged. So there's nobody, after the initial incident has been dealt with, there's nobody saying, okay, what's the emerging picture here? How do we manage this? What's our role in managing it? Because there is no team in the police keeping an overview.
No, that's right. There was no specific team who had responsibility at that time.
Thank you. It did lead to a vulnerability marker being placed on AR's address, which would have been visible for those attending in the future. But the other fact that I wanted to ask you about in relation to this is whether your views about the appropriateness of dealing with this by telephone and not attending would be different if those responding to this had the full picture of earlier information, so knew about the significance of the earlier reports, the 10 knives to school, the school shootings, and so on. Might that have tipped the scales in favour of, forgive me putting it in this way, but we ought to go and have a look?
Sir, I'm not sure it would in these circumstances, because if you look at the individual circumstances of this log, it was essentially AR playing up with his parents at home. It didn't refer, there was no reference from either the parents on the log to any link to previous incidents, or so, for example, the looking at beheadings, etc., that type of behaviour. It appeared to be an incident where he was falling out with his parents at home. So taking that, even with the previous information, I'm not sure that would have necessarily changed the decision to attend.
We turn then to the 30th of November, and you pick this up. Sarah, could we have it on screen? Just page 45 of the statement, please. Paragraph 208 and following. This is another transfer of the call from Merseyside Police. I've asked you about that. So for your note, the incident log is blank 4025.
Thank you.
So you deal in 209 that the Merseyside Police had received a call from AR's father. AR had become angry at the food he'd cooked him, thrown a plate of food at and jumped on a rented vehicle. AR's father said this was a pattern of behaviour for AR and that he had behavioural problems and autism. So that was the event. You set out that the Force Control Room called Alphonse R back at 2029, obtained further information. That included that AR had kicked and punched his father and had actually damaged the front windscreen of the car. And Constables Ward and Hall then arrived at 23:39, so 20 to midnight, about 5 hours after the initial call. This call appeared to have been graded a priority 2, so the attendance about 5 hours after the initial call was well short of target. Would you agree?
I would. I think it's perhaps been informed by the fact there's been a call back to the parents and that the situation had changed when they spoke to them on the phone.
All of the relevant information from that call, I think you've identified as a point of learning, should have been entered onto the log and wasn't.
It should, yes.
And here there was information about the family being scared of AR, that was part of what was communicated, and having trouble with him on a daily basis, yes?
Yes.
And again, in terms of this fundamental issue about the accuracy of record keeping, that information would be relevant for subsequent events and to the exercise of discretion as to how to deal with subsequent episodes of violence.
Yes, it would.
PC Ward has said that he had no memory of being aware that AR had taken a knife into school in 2019, of AR's previous convictions, or of the incident on the 5th of November, just some 4 weeks earlier. All of those would have been relevant things that a response officer should have known.
They should, and my understanding is that that information was available on the Connect system for the officers who attended.
In terms of the response to this, we know again that information from it was shared and referrals made. But do you think that this, being a further call-out, should have prompted some further action?
I think I understand why the officers have taken the action that they did, bearing in mind the position of the parents and the wishes of the parents. and understanding the support that AR was getting and the engagement he had with other agencies. However, I do accept the point that further action may have been helpful.
And I'm not for this incident suggesting by that AR necessarily should have been arrested, or that the wishes of the parents that no further action be taken for the assault should be overridden. But again, there was no team looking at this, and this is a second call out in the same month with someone with AR's conviction and history.
Yes, and I think that's been evident as we've been through this, that there is a clear gap for us there from a policing point of view around a specific team or individual who would have then been in a position to look at the totality of the risk as it developed.
And thank you. Paragraph 225, the top of page 48. 2 points of learning you identified. The first was the call from the operator not recording all of the information, which I've asked you about and you've accepted. At 226, the second point of learning that you identified relates to the supervisor review by PS Yachichi. Forgive me if that's not the correct pronunciation. But that appeared on your investigations, I think, to be a copy and paste from a different case with no resemblance to the investigation. And that, as you candidly say, suggests that there was a failure to conduct a meaningful review of the investigation, deciding on whether she concurred with the decisions of the attending officers. You can't have any confidence that that happened.
No, there's no evidence from that review that a meaningful review has taken place.
And I think developmental feedback has been given to that sergeant.
Yes. And I think, sir, I would like to just perhaps introduce at this point that since that time we have brought in an investigation management policy which sets out very clear directions for what is expected of sergeants when they are conducting a review of an investigation.
But again, the pattern, I'm going to suggest, continues of no further specific other action. And this, a critical view of this might be that this was a case of the police closing off the involvement by handing it to other agencies and, putting it bluntly, not doing anything more yourselves than dealing with the immediate incident that was in front of you.
Yes, I can understand that position. I suppose what I would also observe is that it was clear to the officers at that point that there were other agencies involved with AR and his parents and providing support. So I don't seek to suggest that it was appropriate for policing not to have an input in it, but I do understand why they made those decisions at the time with what else was taking place.
But we come back to this loop that officers, therefore, and the police may not have been aware, for example, of the, by this stage, significant non-attendance of AR, not going to school. So
yes.
School were struggling, not seeing him. And that CAMS may have had difficulty getting him to engage. School visitors were not getting any change. And he wasn't always keen to see the mental health services. And without that feedback, it's not really proper multi-agency working at all, is it?
No, I completely accept that. But I suppose, looking at it from a different perspective, the fact that it's us trying to understand what we think the police responsibility in circumstances where a young man is experiencing some issues with his mental health, isn't attending school, is causing problems at home. At what point, I suppose, do we expect the police to step into that environment and take responsibility around it? I accept your point completely around not being aware of the full picture, and that may have assisted our decision making, but there is still a point there about the role of the police in this, I think.
I'm going to ask you to slightly hold that thought because I do want to come back to it. But let's go on in the chronology. We now come to March 22. and of course the incident of the knife on the bus. PC Fairclough, in his evidence, has told us something of the difficulties of using the Samsung device on the ground. You can access things, but it's not nearly so user-friendly on the device as at a desktop terminal. Do you recognise that as a problem?
I think the feedback that we've had from our officers since we've introduced the Samsung devices has been largely really positive, because prior to that, there was no option for them other to come back into the station and to complete those inquiries. So the Samsungs are undoubtedly really helpful for some things. I think it's human nature that if you're sat in an office with two screens and a desktop computer, of course it's an easier interaction. But the information that officers require, for example, in circumstances like this, is available to them on the Samsung devices.
Yep. So an improvement in terms of access on the ground. Have you as a force thought about this difficulty? That while that's an improvement and no doubt to be welcomed, it might introduce an unintended risk, which is that officers with a not easy to navigate handheld device think they've checked the systems, but there are tabs which they might look at more easily and readily on a desktop, but when they get back think, well, I checked that on my Samsung, so I don't need to. Has there been any training around that?
I don't believe there's been any specific training, but I think it's important to note what we have trialled at the moment is the use of laptops for our response officers and the use of mobile tablets as well, which are sort of iPads, for want of a better word.
The halfway house.
So we've tried that with the different teams, and the feedback from the officers at the moment is that the tablets, the Samsung tablets, are more user-friendly for them and are preferable. So we're in the process of implementing that across the response teams at the moment.
Thank you. And trying to look at PC Fairclough and to an extent PC Rhodes as well in a way that is fair to them, while there was more information that they could have found on the systems, whether on the ground or back at the station later on that day after the event, their relative ignorance of important information inevitably reflects the shortcomings in the recording of information about AR's risk that I've taken some time to take you through. Would you agree?
Yes.
So not aware of the prevent referrals, as an example. Understanding that there was one incident in 2019 and not two. Not being aware of information about school shootings being researched. Those were all matters that PC Fairclough was not aware of and should have been aware of.
They were, however, some of that information was available to them.
Yes,
on the Samsungs at the time.
It's a combination of not sufficiently looking at the information that was available, but query how user-friendly it is, but then some information not being recorded at all. So
yes.
Information in relation to prevent. It looks like that intelligence report, the reference is on page 2. I took you to it. You just wouldn't be able to see that.
No. It's my understanding that prevent referrals do not automatically go onto police systems, for understandable.
That's something which we'll explore in due course with others. And this information, not just important for Constables Fairclough and Rhodes, but also for Sergeant Clark. Would you agree that Sergeant Clark should have been able to access all that information? And it was a similar situation. Some of it would have been visible with adequate checks, but some of it would not have been.
Yes.
Thank you. And do you agree in general terms that the decision-making on the ground, principally by PC Fairclough, but also to an extent by Sergeant Clark in agreeing to this course, appears to have been heavily influenced by the perception that this was a mental health incident.
It does appear that way, yes.
And do we see in that echoes of the point that I raised with you in questioning about training and the risk of somebody with a mental health diagnosis being put into the mental health box rather than having a focus of this can be both, this can be dangerous criminal acts that need to be dealt with occurring on the background of mental health. You can have both, it's not either or.
Yes, I think we could be more explicit about that in a training, I'm sure.
If we look, please, at your paragraph 249, so that's on page 53. 249, page 53. Accepting that this is a complex area, what you say is the actions of PC Fairclough took fell within the range of reasonable options available to him. Do you see that there?
Yes.
You also go on to say that it is not the decision that you would have made. So paragraph 254, you say, I have over 25 years of service, and you make the point very fairly towards them that Constables Fairclough and Rhodes were probationers. Doing the best I can to avoid hindsight, I think I would have arrested AR once it was established that he had a knife in a public place. So the way that you, as it were, set out your stall in relation to this is an officer with all my experience would have arrested, or I certainly would have done, but I can understand why they took the decisions that they did, and I think it was within the range of reasonable options.
Yes, there were a number of options available to them at that time. I'm coming back to the point I made right at the start of my statement about trying to avoid hindsight reasoning. From my point of view, with the experience that I would have had at that time, taking into account the two previous incidents, the NCA referral where he'd been taking a knife into school, the arrest where he'd taken a knife and a hockey stick into school. For me, having considered it at that point, this wasn't an isolated incident. There was a pattern, and I think I would have arrested him at that point.
I follow entirely why you would have done what you say you did. I'm going to challenge you, Assistant Chief Constable, on the assertion that it fell within the range of reasonable options, but I don't want to do so unfairly. So may I just first of all deal with this? A fair review of this incident would acknowledge, would it not, that there were signs of things that Constable Fairclough did appropriately and proactively. Yes?
Yes.
I went through them with him, but they included a check on the CCTV, he checked with taxis, he checked with hospitals. He did try to do checks on his Samsung, although there may have been issues about how far they went. But all of those things he attempted to do, and he did take advice at that stage, at the early stage, from his sergeant. And all of that, I think you would say, for a probationary constable, was appropriate. Would you agree?
Yes.
And indicates a young officer who was doing his best in good faith to make the right decision.
Yes, I would agree.
But going on to the point of challenge, Constable Fairclough's decision, would you agree, it doesn't seem to have paid sufficient attention, first of all, to AR's history of violence?
He doesn't appear to have taken that into consideration, no.
And part of that because of information that was visible that would have shown that there were 2 incidents in 2019 and not 1, for example.
Yes.
But in particular, once they are on the journey and there has been the indication from AR, when asked why he had the knife, that he said he wanted to stab someone, and that then poisoning is mentioned, and whether that was, I've had thoughts of making poison or I have tried to make poison, whichever of those two it was, once that is referred to, dealing with this essentially as a safeguarding matter was the wrong approach, wasn't it?
I think taking everything into account, as we now know, then yes, it was.
You'll forgive me. I'm not asking about everything we now know. On what was known or should have been known at the time, even on the systems as they were. So 2 events in 2019, the conviction taken together with saying that he had the knife because he wanted to stab someone, smiling about that and referring to poison. It was the wrong decision not to go down the route of arrest.
Yes.
And entirely understanding, Assistant Chief Constable, the desire to avoid hindsight, and entirely recognising all that Constable Fairclough did right, why then did you say in your statement that it fell within the range of reasonable options?
It was my assessment at the time, having considered the account that PC Fairclough had given and the things that he had taken into account when he'd come to that decision, that there were a number of options available. I considered that one to be one of the reasonable ones. I was particularly drawn to his comments in relation to attempting to keep children out of custody. And, you know, our officers face an unenviable task in relation to this. They were operating in an environment at the time, and I tried to put myself in the officer's shoes when I've made this statement. A couple of months prior to that, we'd published some information on the intranet about custody being a place of last resort for children. That was a position that policing, not just in Lancashire, but across the country, was being encouraged to adopt from the government at the time. There'd been HMIC reports that the NPCC guidance was clear about that. So I absolutely understand the position that the officers were in and the difficult decisions that they had to make. And I think it's for that reason that, for one of the reasons that I've tried to put myself in their position and consider what they were thinking about when they've made that decision. However, looking at it now and taking everything into account now and having considered it properly, I would concede that he should have been arrested.
Thank you. And so it didn't fall within the range of reasonable options?
I think that's a really there were reasonable options. I wouldn't say it didn't fall within the range of reasonable options that were available to them at the time. I would have made a different decision.
Well, it's more than that. It was plainly the wrong response. Once he is saying, against a background of convictions for ABH and having an offensive weapon in a school, and previously having taken a weapon to school 10 times and being expelled for it, he's now saying the reason for having the knife is he wants to stab somebody, and he's had thought of making poison. It was plainly not the right response.
Yes, that's fair.
And would a fairer way to characterise it, rather than paragraph 249, be perhaps this, that you can understand how an officer who's had training emphasising custody as a last resort could have fallen into making the mistake that Fairclough made?
Yes, that's a fair assessment.
The emphasis in training on custody being a last resort for children should not be diminished in any way in its importance. But has anything been done to slightly recalibrate that message so that it has alongside itself, so that it has alongside it the message, if the risk that a child poses to others means that arrest is the right course, you should act on that assessment, even if it's an assessment you must make with care. Has that message gone out?
That message hasn't gone out specifically. However, what I would say is that within the training that we give to our officers, we expect and encourage them to use their discretion and their professional judgment. And the training is also very clear, and the messaging is very clear about seeking advice from their own supervision as well. So I would expect our officers to deal with everything on an individual basis, being mindful of the desire, where not necessary, to criminalise children or put them into the custody system. What that doesn't mean, and I think it goes to the point we described earlier around mental health or criminal, it's a similar point there around, you know, you can have a child who does need to come into custody, and I expect our officers to take robust action when those circumstances are present.
Following? And PC Fairclough, it might be thought, was conspicuously candid in accepting that it was a significant error for him not to take further advice from his sergeant after AR had mentioned the wanting to stab someone and had mentioned the poison. And I think you would agree with that.
Yes, very much.
It is sobering to reflect, is it not, that what one can take from the evidence of Fairclough, Rhodes and Clark is that if the systems for recording information had given them the full picture, it would have been a very obvious decision to arrest AR on the 17th of March.
I think that's fair, yes.
Looking at how matters might then have developed, whether as a request for a consensual search from the parents or a search under the powers of Section 18 of PACE, it's reasonably likely that there would have been a search of his room at least.
Yes, I think I'm aware that his room had been searched when he was reported missing, but of course there's a significant difference
in the
between
type of search.
Of search. Had he been arrested for offences relating to the production of poison, then that would have led to a search of his address, yes.
And at that time, on the evidence that the inquiry has, what would have been found at that time is castor oil seeds, ricin seeds. It's unclear whether he would have yet done anything with them and tried to make it into the toxin ricin, but ricin seeds with a stash of chemistry equipment, funnels, scales, filters, and so on. And that could not have failed to have caused very significant concern about AR, even if it was the raw seeds alongside chemical equipment. Would you agree?
Yes, if those items had been present during the search and we've no reason to believe that they weren't, then that would have caused significant concern, yes.
Yeah. The evidence is they were under his bed.
The evidence, my understanding, is they were under his bed when in July 2024. We don't know where they were at the time.
And finding rice and seeds and chemical equipment would have, I'm going to suggest, certainly or almost certainly have led to his devices being seized.
Yes.
And the seizure of his devices would have led to discovering at that time, because it had happened in August and September 21, that he had not once but twice downloaded a lengthy academic paper that contained the totality of the Al-Qaeda training manual.
Yes, that's correct.
And it's likely that AR would have been charged with offences around certainly the Al-Qaeda training manual.
Yes.
And prosecutors would have looked very carefully at the position of the rice and seeds and the chemical equipment, even if the rice and seeds hadn't yet been processed.
Yes, I think had those items been found as we described in the Al-Qaeda manual, that investigation would have been progressed by counter-terrorism policing, undoubtedly.
So I was going to ask you that it would have led to two things: intense focus on the risk posed by AR.
Yes.
And serious counter-terrorism police interests, which others are probably going to be best able to describe in their evidence. But it's just common sense, isn't it?
It is, sir.
And he may have been facing a custodial sentence.
It's highly likely if that had played out, yes.
And even though, therefore, this was 2 years prior to his attack, the fact that officers on the ground didn't have that full picture, but it would have led to an arrest and search if they had had that full picture, must mean that this was a very serious missed opportunity to identify and address the risks posed by AR.
So I agree with that, and I am extremely sorry about that as well.
Thank you. There was no referral, I think, to the Vulnerability Reduction Network at this stage. I think you accept that that's something that could have been done at this stage, poison having been mentioned, yes?
More around the knife, potentially,
the knife,
yes, but yes.
And a training need there, because it seems the officers weren't aware of that.
Yes, and we're addressing that at the moment, sir.
Thank you. And the community safety team would have been another appropriate referral at this time.
It would have been, yes.
But the violence reduction team, quite apart from what may have been found in the search, but even without the arrest having happened, the community safety team referral or the violence reduction network referral would have been appropriate.
Yes, it would.
And for the first time in terms of a serious incident happening again, he would have been eligible now because the age range has come down by this time, March 20.
So for the violence reduction network, the fact that he'd been in possession of the knife, it had been reduced to 10 years old, so he could have been referred to the divert programme if he'd consented to doing it.
Thank you. So I'm not, if you'll forgive me, going to take you through the careful and diligent assessment of points of learning that you've set out in your statement, but can I just identify the relevant paragraphs? It's paragraphs 261, so at page 55, through to 268, the seventh point of learning in relation to that. Can I suggest that there are further important factors beyond those that you've identified? The first is for IT systems and information systems to be improved, the recording of them and the visibility of them, so that frontline response officers have a better chance of seeing the full picture.
I would need to give that some further thought, sir, because my understanding of this and how our IT systems are and what is available to the officers on the front line, the issue for me here appears to be the lack of recording of some of those details, so potentially a training issue in relation to that, as opposed to the visibility for the officers on the front line.
So I'm grouping it all together, but that group of actions, the system, I'm not saying buy a new computer system, it's not for me, but that group of things, what the system is, the visibility of it, and importantly, the recording of information, those things taken together, there needs to be action to ensure that frontline officers have a better picture of young people that they're dealing with when they've got a history of violence.
Yes.
Secondly, and relatedly, there needs to be a greater emphasis, would you agree, on dealing with the overall picture of risk, not just to individual incidents. The cumulative risk needs to be assessed and managed.
Yes, I think that's been highlighted throughout.
Thirdly, so far as mental health is concerned, there needs to be a greater emphasis on the complexity of mental health so that officers don't immediately assume that mental health means a lack of capacity and it shouldn't be treated as a crime.
Yes, I think that needs to be more explicit in a training.
And fourthly, while the focus on custody as a last resort for children is very important, there also needs to be some consideration given to recalibrating that so that officers on the ground, if they feel that arrest is warranted, are not afraid to do so.
Yes, that's fair.
If you were to envisage a multi-agency approach in December 2019 or early 2020 that had led to a simple shared summary of what was known between the agencies and a shared assessment of risk, dealing solely with what the constabulary and other agencies knew, a simple running summary could have included that AR had been excluded from school for bringing a knife 10 times to school,
Yes.
that he'd researched school shootings,
Yes.
that he'd made inappropriate comment about severed heads during a lesson,
Yes.
that he had his conviction for ABH on school premises and for carrying an offensive weapon, but also that while the alleged bully was his intended target, when he couldn't assault the bully, he just turned to the nearest lad available and attacked him instead.
Yes, that's right.
That led to a conviction and referral order,
Yes.
subject to issues that we'll explore with counter-terrorism police about whether it can be recorded in open that prevent referrals have been made, that 3 prevent referrals had been made, and that while the decision was that they didn't meet the threshold, they would certainly consider if further information became available,
Yes.
that AR had a diagnosis of autism, but that one feature of that appeared to be that he had some fixations on senses of grievance, whether it's his change of school or other factors, and a maladaptive way that he appeared at some times to be dealing with that was leading to use of violence.
That's right.
And then the further incidents in November could have been added to that running risk assessment,
They could.
not of it themselves perhaps so significant as you've indicated, but a recent example of violence in the home. That sort of multi-agency shared risk assessment, perhaps on a common platform or at least shared, that would have led to a different outcome in March, if that was visible to officers.
So I don't think I am able to say that definitively it would have led to a different outcome. What is absolutely clear, however, is that that lack of one single repository across all agencies to understand exactly as you've described there the incidents and what attempts have been made to engage with AR and his response to those would have been hugely helpful for officers and other professionals dealing with AR during that time.
My question was deliberately not a different outcome in July with the dreadful attack, but a different outcome in March. Because as you've explained in your evidence, that information being known would have led to arrest, would have led to search, would have led to finding the signs that were already there in terms of ricin seeds and chemical flasks, and that would have led to a significant criminal justice intervention and a very significant counter-terrorism interest in AR. So when your answer was, I don't think I'm able to say definitively it would have led to a different outcome, in relation to March, I think you can say...
Sorry, I slightly misunderstood your question, sir. No, I agree, yes.
Thank you. And you'll understand, Assistant Chief Constable, that you are there taking these questions and having to deal with it. It's not easy. It's not directed at you. I'm interested in exploring the systems with you. But to the outsider, can you understand the concern that that seemingly common sense step of having a shared risk assessment that's visible to agencies seems simple and yet just wasn't there?
Yes, that's absolutely fair, and it's something that both policing and across agencies we've wrestled with for some time now to get a single system that talks across social care, mental health, education, policing, so that it's there and available to everybody to help them, and that is something that we continue to work on, but is proving really challenging.
But for example, that there are agencies that need to work together, for example, in the prison context, where you have prison escorts who are one company, the prison provider is another, the police are involved with them. But you have a shared form for dealing with the risk. And there doesn't seem even at the moment to be a shared risk form that all the agencies use just to record this is the basic history.
No, at the moment it's recorded within individual agencies' documents.
And it's not just about interagency communication, because as we've explored and as you've been helping us with, the police in March 2022 don't have good sight on what happened with the police in 2019.
No, that's fair.
And that, would you agree, needs to change?
Yes.
There were dealings with AR on the 14th of May, and you deal with that in your statement as well. I'm going to deal with that much more shortly. But the essence of was that there was a dropped 999 call. Officers arrived, I think, at 4:54 in the morning to deal with that one. They wouldn't have had much opportunity because it was a drop call. They attended as a grade 1 incident. They're arriving on blue lights and sirens, so not a lot of time to do research into the history of that. When they arrive, they're told by AR's father what had happened, that he'd woken up in the night, demanded a laptop, and then started throwing food around the kitchen and locked himself in the bathroom, overfilled the bath, causing damage in the house. At that stage, the officers were told that he was refusing to attend school, refusing to take medication for his autism. And the parents did say that they would be speaking to CAMS and the GP for help and advice. Taking it as short as I may, I think the officers, as you've set out in your 278, made the decision to submit a vulnerable child investigation as high risk, but but did not take the view that there'd been a criminal offence committed on this occasion. And would you say that in general terms that's appropriate?
Yes, it was, yes.
Thank you. They also made an op in Compass referral. I think, again, it was one that perhaps didn't go directly to the right school, but perhaps not of particular significance. In relation to that, it's right to say that there was no further police follow-up in relation to that.
That's right, yes.
And if one puts together the two incidents in November and the March incident and this incident now in May, there wasn't any thinking going on at any kind of overview level of thinking, actually, this is the fourth call in 6 months to this address, but perhaps the interventions by other agencies aren't working. There's no assessment of that kind.
No, I think that's fair to say, yes.
And then on the 21st of March, there was the request for a welfare. 21st of March 23, I'm so sorry. The following year, the 21st of March 23, there's the welfare call out from the school, which Lancashire did not attend in furtherance of the policy, effectively, that the police should not deal if it's more appropriate for other agencies and there is not an immediate risk of very serious harm. Yes?
That's right, yes.
In relation to that, I think you say that PCRO Corrie, in relation to that the ultimate decision was appropriate in the light of that right care, right person policy, but that he should have done more on the systems and in the information that he was getting. So he should have worked out and recorded who the student was, their age, mental health issues, matters of that kind. So there was poor information gathering.
Yes.
But ultimately, I think you say that the final decision was justifiable.
Yes, I think the final decision not to deploy was the correct decision. However, it's clear that the PCRO hasn't done sufficient checks and hasn't recorded sufficient information, which again may have assisted his decision making.
Thank you. Again, while on the information that being given, that might have been appropriate within the right care, right person, if all of the factors that I've gone through were visible, that might have led to a different outcome. Would you agree?
I don't think so, sir, no. I think when you consider the report that came in, the teacher who made the referral or the staff member who made the referral made reference to the fact that CAMS had seen him a couple of months previously. I don't believe that had he asked further questions it would have changed the outcome around police deployment. I wouldn't suggest that policing is the right service to be checking on absenteeism from school.
Of course, in general terms, that is difficult to take issue with. But in the case of AR, in relation to whom, if you put the cumulative picture together, and I'm not for the moment saying the ricin would have been known about, the rice and seeds would have been known about, or the Al-Qaeda training manual, but even with all of the combined incidents that had gone on since October of 2019, would not a good visibility of that complete picture cause to say, well, actually, there is a policing role here in going, okay, this has only arisen because he's not attending school, but in terms of keeping an eye on the risk of this young man, nobody seems to have eyes on him, and we ought to go and take a look.
I understand the question, but I don't believe that that was the role of the police to do at that time.
Is that, and forgive me for asking the question, is that, I don't think it's the role of the police to do it at that time because in the real world we don't have the resources to do it, hence right care, right person. Or is it we would like to do that, because that would be good policing intervention, but we don't have the resources?
I don't think it's specifically a question around resource. And if you look at the right care, right person policy, that was brought in to make sure that when you're dealing with concern for welfare checks, the appropriate agency with the appropriate expertise and knowledge deploys or is responsible for that incident. And so even taking what we've described today into account, and with the PCRO's further knowledge, had he done those checks, I still don't believe that policing was the appropriate agency. Of course, it would have been nice to get eyes on him, but I think there are other agencies better placed to fulfil that role than policing. If we were to divert away from that, it would mean we would have to move resource from doing another function to be able to move into doing that. So in an ideal world, of course, with a different level of resource, we would like to be more involved in that type of work. However, that would take us away from our core responsibilities of responding to incidents, investigating crime.
It's not something you could do in the generality of cases by any means. I'm just seeking to explore with you whether if you had a position with a young person who is flagged for a number of reasons as of significant concern, whether there ought to be some discretion in that when the ongoing management of risk says, this is a young man we need to be keeping an eye on.
Yes, I understand. Well,
turning to your reflections and improvements, could we just have paragraph 313 at page 65 available, please? You've set out there your intention to deal with the inquiry's questions about lessons that have been learnt. You go on to deal with recommendations, and you set out quite a lot of detail about the review that took place by PSD, the initial review that was done, and the further work that has been done after that. And if you'll forgive me, it's set out in careful and appropriate detail in your statement, so I'm not going to go through the totality of it. But I want to pick up some other matters that have emerged from the evidence. The first I should just ask you about, I've touched on it already in the issues I've just been asking about, but the resourcing within the police. A number of officers have suggested that this was an issue on response teams. So Sergeant Clark, for example, described that the response sergeant in Lancashire was covering the role that was done by 4 separate sergeants in Cheshire. Is that a fair comment?
I'm not aware of how Cheshire are set up, but in relation to the sergeants at West Lancashire, there are 2 sergeants aligned to each response team in West Lancashire. As with any policing service, there will often be abstractions, whether it's to leave, whether it's to sickness, to other duties, but I don't believe that the position was significantly different there than it was elsewhere.
Similarly, returning just briefly to the 17th of March, the 2 officers, Fairclough and Rhodes, were both probationers and both, I think, in single-crewed vehicles. Does that reflect difficulties of resourcing or recruitment or retention?
I think that's a really interesting point, and one I'd like to explore a little bit further, if I may. If you think about that time then, and the resourcing that policing has now, we're in a position where late 80s, early 90s, there was a significant recruitment drive into policing. What that led to was, towards the end of the late teens, early 20s, those officers retiring, reaching the pensionable service. That coincided with a period of significant austerity in which all public services had to make some really difficult decisions about the resourcing due to the budgets. And then the government announced an uplift programme which started in April 2020 with 20,000 extra police officers over 3 years, which sounds fantastic. The reality of that, sir, is that those police officers, the majority of whom inexperienced, replaced officers who were highly experienced having left the police. There were some restrictions put on policing at the time around their recruitment and some requirements around the recruitment. And by that, what I would refer to is that officers were required to meet the headcount that was established to them. Forces were required to meet the headcount that was allocated to them by the government. If they didn't meet those targets, those resource numbers, there were significant financial penalties for forces behind there. The result of that was that we had to recruit in large intakes, which we wouldn't normally do, which had an impact on the training that we can give to the officers during that time, and also came on the back of a period of national lockdown during COVID, where unfortunately we had to resort to training out a number of our officers and those intakes over Microsoft Teams. So if you bring all that context together, it was a real challenge for us, and it remains a challenge for us to make sure that we have the right level of resources with the right level of experience and the right supervision to deliver the service that we want to do. So I absolutely understand the concerns of some of the officers in relation to being young in service. I listened to our officers' evidence yesterday, and I heard PC Rhodes talk about she was one of the most experienced on her shift with 4 years in. That is not unique to Lancashire Police. The position's improving, but at the period of time that's relevant to this inquiry, I think it's important that we consider the wider issues in relation to police resourcing and the restrictions that we're working under at that time.
Thank you. And if you gave a blunt and candid assessment, do you think that those challenges with which the chair will be familiar impacted on these specific events or not?
I don't know. I really don't know.
Thank you. A second aspect that I wanted to pick up is the relationship with Counter-Terrorism Police North West. And if we could just look at one of the aspects. So you were asked about whether there were things that you would invite the chair to consider as recommendations. And if we look at paragraph 334, subparagraph 1, at the top of page 71, please. You said there improved integration and information sharing between counter-terrorism policing, prevent and mainstream public services, specifically having an effective system in place to manage the risk and safeguarding for those cases that are de-escalated from prevent. I've covered most of this ground, but while that seems to be principally, certainly in your first sentence, talking about more information being pushed out from prevent to the constabulary, I think you've already accepted that it is important that the information that is shared is properly recorded by Lancashire and made available where it's appropriate to do so to frontline officers.
Yes, that's fair, yes.
And if we look at paragraph 317, which is at page 67. Page 67. Your statement here says, I've been asked whether I consider that prior to the 29th of July, Lancashire Constabulary identified and addressed adequately or at all the risk that AR posed to others. I'd like to answer this question in relation to each of the incidents that Lancashire Constabulary were involved in. And then you then gave, again, a helpful and careful and précis of the incidents, going through them one by one. And then 324, you say, so over the page, please. Lancashire Constabulary does consider that more could be done, it's the middle of the page, to better assess the risk that AR posed, including the deployed officers obtaining more information on AR's history from the Lancashire Constabulary systems. That's in relation to the event that we've been looking at a lot of the 17th of March, all right? You go on to deal with the 6th incident and the 7th incident in the rest of that page. And then if we can go on to page 69, against that background, you say 327, I've been asked if I consider that it was not Lancashire Constabulary's responsibility or sole responsibility to identify and or address the risk that AR posed, whose responsibility I consider it was. And then you say, I do consider that Lancashire Constabulary had responsibility to address the risk that AR posed through all the dealings with him. As I've outlined above, I believe that Lancashire Constabulary did take steps to address the risk. Whilst more could have been done on some of those occasions, as detailed above, whenever there was any direct contact with AR, information was always shared by Lancashire Constabulary with or for other agencies, all right? I don't want to overlook paragraph 331, and I think 331 touches on the evidence that you've just given us. These events bring the current challenges faced by policing into stark focus. The volume and complexity and demand that police officers are required to deal with has both shifted and increased over time, extending far wider than dealing with the effects of crime and criminality. A significant proportion of people who our officers now deal with are children, many of them with complex mental health needs or neurodiverse conditions. Whilst policing may be the most appropriate public resource to deal with the immediate incident, there are other agencies who are better equipped to manage the longer-term prevailing issues that are the root cause of these issues, all right? So I read that out because I don't want to be said to have overlooked it. But if we go back to 328, there is, I suggest, this risk in the approach in your statement, bringing my questions to a conclusion. In 328, you appear to be saying, we as a force have looked really carefully and sincerely, and I don't doubt that for a moment, at the responses individually. And in doing so, there were individual, on each of those incidents, there were things that could have been done more, but generally the response was reasonable. Do you accept that that's the overall approach taken?
Yes.
And what I suggest when we look at the recommendations on your final page of the statement at 71, and I don't wish to be unfair to you, because these are all points which the Chair will need to consider. So the information sharing with counter-terrorism police at 1, at 2, the importance of timely access to mental health services for children, at 3, the development of community mental health services provisions for children, which is capable of effectively dealing with children and young people with a predisposition for violence. Now, all of those are serious issues that must be grappled with. But the totality of the approach towards the end of your statement in looking at recommendations was outward looking at other agencies. And we should we not, add in, under your 3, 4, there needs to be radical change to the multi-agency approach to ensure that risk is better assessed and better shared. Yes?
I think that's a fair point, yes.
And 5, Lancashire Constabulary, as other forces, must play an active part in that to ensure that we are better sighted on the overall risk and better address the overall risk. Yes?
Yes.
And the absence of those sort of overarching conclusions in terms of the bigger problem, can I suggest, I hope without discourtesy to you, underlines the very problem that there is too much focus on the response to individual incidents and not enough genuine multi-agency addressing of the risk of men like AR.
So I think the way I've written the statement and that we've put it together has quite, as you say, is rightly focused on each individual incident. I completely accept that what it doesn't cover is that ongoing assessment of the totality of the risk and the need to share that amongst agencies. I think there's a wider point that I would like to make in relation here to what is a really wicked problem that we are wrestling with across agencies at the moment, not just within policing, and that we can't solve as individual agencies. And to provide some context around that, you know, I joined the police service 29 years ago. The role of a police officer now is hugely different than it was when I joined 29 years ago. There was no internet, there was no mobile phones. Sadly, there are other children out there with similar interests and behaviours that AR displayed. There is a real challenge in managing children's mental health, and I say that from a position of empathy and sympathy for children's mental health services who are working extremely hard, doing the best, but are overburdened. On the back of the COVID pandemic, we have a group of children here who have perhaps not had the same access to service that they would have done otherwise. They've got what appears to be completely unregulated access to the internet, where at the click of a button they can see the most horrific and horrendous incidents. And they can go online and purchase things which, frankly, I see no legitimate purpose for in crossbows, in machetes. Rarely a day goes by where we look at our morning summaries and there hasn't been an incident the day before where somebody has either been attacked or threatened with a machete. There is no other purpose for these weapons other than to intimidate, enforce violence, or deliver violence on people. It is far too easy for our young people, particularly those who are suffering with their mental health, to be influenced and to see this material and to then get access to weapons that allow them to carry out on occasion atrocities, the like of which I hope we never see again, and that we never find ourselves in the position where we're sat in an inquiry like this again. But I fear that it will. So the changes that we need to look at, I accept completely that Lancashire Constabulary and policing has a significant role in this, and we need to improve. But these are things that, as a society, there needs to be systemic change around if we're going to make a difference.
Thank you. I'm conscious of the time, sir. May I, perhaps through you, sir, just indicate, Assistant Chief Constable, that we've covered a lot of ground, and it's not a trial, it is a process. And I would have perhaps asked you more questions about the practicability of changes. And if there are things that you wish to add in writing after your oral evidence, I know that that will be received. So there were some questions.
What I'd like to do about that, Mr. Moss, and I'm sorry this is going to trespass on your time, Mr. Winstanley, given there have been some responses under the Rule 10 process, I'm going to rise now, Mr. Moss, and sit again at 5 to 2. And could I ask you please to have a discussion with Council as to whether, in accordance with Rule 10, there are any further matters to be explored?
Could I just have one brief moment?
Certainly.
So we'll do that. We may need a short second break after that. It won't take very long, but because of the arrangements for this afternoon.
Certainly. All right.
Thank you.
All right.